Hey everyone, welcome to Value First, the product-led sales podcast, the show where I interview product-led sales and growth leaders who share their secrets on how to grow revenue at SaaS companies. Today, I'm beyond excited to interview one of the OGs of product-led growth, the man who authored the book on product-led growth, who created the Product-Led Institute, who manages the product-led growth community on Slack, and who teaches the product-led growth certification. I'm talking about Mr. Wes Bush. Wes, thanks for taking the time. How are you?
No worries. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, let's just start with what the Product-Led Institute is all about and what you guys do.
Yeah. So first off, we rebranded from Product-Led Institute to just Product-Led. But what we really focus on is just this core mission around how can we help companies build a successful product-led business. That's what we're super passionate about. We want to give the rebels all the tools they need to really succeed. And so right now we're doing that with our certification program, which helps really just get people in the nitty-gritty, understanding what PLG is, because most people still just think it's just this free trial, free model, but there's so much more to it, as this podcast is a credit to. It's like there's product-led sales. Who would have known? Most people just think it's just product-led growth. So I'm excited to expand the conversation around all the other things that go into this go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to unravel and unpack with product-led growth. But the first thing I gotta ask you, because a lot of people are throwing product-led growth around. It's a sexy term. It's starting to be a buzzword. Um, I'm guessing the answer, but do you think PLG is what AI was 5 years ago? So a buzz term that everyone used to raise money, but then everyone realized, there's no business application.
No. Okay. So the reason why it's different, and of course I'm biased, but like when you hear AI, it's like it's an AI company. And then like you go underneath that and then you see like, oh man, like this is just like, some simple math that the computer is doing. It's nothing crazy. And like it's just for marketing purposes and stuff like that. One of the cool things is that's like front facing marketing ish speak that you want to do to incentivize whether it's investors or customers that potentially purchase your product. But when you go product led, you're not so much just like preaching, we're a product led company and this is how we're going to help. No, you actually feel product led companies. It's less about being told, what is this? Is more about seeing, oh, wow, I just experienced the value of the product so quickly. This is fantastic. I want to potentially purchase this product. So when I look at it from the customer perspective, I think that's the thing that really matters, and where it sticks is with customers. Customers resonate with this. There was a great study by Forrester way back. It went through just the fact that, 3 out of every 4 people who purchase products, they would rather self-educate longer than they ever were before they talk to someone in sales. So product-led growth is just how you make that possible.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting that it's not like AI who is used to sell or used to describe the value prop, but now it's more like in the background, that's your strategy, but that's not how you sell or get customers to you. Um, what is product-led growth for, just in simple terms, for people who are new with this, who are trying to get buy-in for product-led growth? What are the basics, since you're a pro on the subject, for product-led growth?
Yeah, so just like an overview definition of like the basics of it, or what would you like to dig into?
Yeah, the basics of what does product-led growth mean for a company, and what are the main core functions of it as a strategy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a couple different fundamental differences. I'll share two. There's mindset shifts. So if you're a sales-led company, one of the things that you're typically doing, there's two main ones. So you're going to simply tell people about your product. That's the main thing. You want to hop on a call with them. You want to go through a demo of the product. And in that case, you're, yes, showing them a little bit with the demo, but the main emphasis is I want to tell you about the product so you understand it better and we can build some rapport through that. And so a typical sales like company, once they're done kind of telling you about the product, it's then time to sell. And so it's tell, then sell. And that is one thing where it's like that's what we're up against. The competition for product-led companies is just companies who are completely sales-led like that. Whereas if you're looking at a product-led company, one of the main big differences there is right from the beginning, it's all about showing you the value of the product. So you'll get started for free. You can sign up for the free trial, free model, or whatever, and you can experience the value of the product. So they show and serve, and then they make the case to make it an easy upgrade for you because they've led with value. To what you were saying about even just this podcast, it's value first. That's what it is when you're thinking about how do you go to market. Is it you simply leading with just the selling, or is it the serving that comes first? And so product-led companies really embody that kind of like servant mindset of just like, how can we serve you first? How can we help you first before asking anything in return? And so that's, I think, one of the things that I love about it and why I'm so passionate about product-led growth is because at the end of the day, it's just about empowering people to really create these products and experiences that do help millions and millions of people experience the value of their product faster, quicker, and make a better educated decision on if it is something they want to purchase because they've actually experienced the value. It's a no-brainer in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of companies that are thinking about product-led growth, I think one of the most asked question is, how do I switch from from a sales motion, from a sales-led strategy to a product-led growth strategy? And you talk about it in your course, which is super interesting, and I want to dive a bit deeper here. How would you go about getting buy-in for product-led growth and then merging maybe a sales-led strategy with a product-led approach, aside from just a freemium version of the product?
Yeah, no. So like I call them the transformers. These people make up a lot of
Love
our
it.
customers as far as like going from sales led to product led because it is a big shift. That first part I was mentioning about like the shift in thinking, going from telling to showing and going from selling to serving, that's really the first part. Like if you want to make that transformation, you have to start with the mindset shift. And that's probably the hardest part. A lot of times what we kind of caught us off guard, even with our programs as well, as we started seeing like teams sending 20, 40 plus people to it. And we're like, oh, why? Like it's more like individual value we were initially thinking. But then it just came to the fact that they're trying to get everyone communicating the same language, get them on the same page, understand the culture of what it means to be product led, understand that it's not just a product thing. It is product led sales, product led marketing, product led support. And I could keep going on, but like every team has to think differently. And so that's the easiest way. If you want to get buy-in, you need to make sure that they know how they're involved in this, because a lot of times I think sales might perceive this as a threat. It's like, oh, the product can sell itself. And yes, it can. Some of the best product led products, they can sell themselves. You can purchase that product, you can use that product all without talking to someone in sales. So it's like, well, what does that role look like in sales? And once you start explaining that and going deeper, another layer deeper, then they start realizing, oh, I get to work with like product qualified accounts and work on like these high value accounts. Amazing. I want more of that.
Yeah,
They become the
yeah,
biggest advocates. So that's really where you're going to get the resistance is, hey, like product-led growth might have this potentially negative connotation for like sales and some of these other areas, but just confronting that and leaning into it and not just being like, we're going in this direction, we don't care about you, whatever. It's like, no, we're going to try and figure out how you're involved, how this is going to ultimately make your job better. And that's the easiest way. And whenever we look at the case studies of companies that have made this transition from sales that are product led the fastest, one of the things they all have in common is it started with a small team. They had like a marketer, a designer, a growth person, and someone who was driving that lead. And it all started with them trying to identify the first principles of what it really meant to be product led for their business. Now, when you think of companies like Amazon, I'll just pick them out of the box. One of their first principles is people will always want their packages faster. So they invest billions of dollars every year in helping you get your packages faster. And the same thing happens to your software product. It's like, now, when you think about it, would anyone want to access the value of your product slower? No.
No, of course not.
Never gonna be that. They want that value first and quick. That's it. It's a first principle for all software companies. And so when you kind of rally behind that and get people bought into that, it's like this is something that is a core to our business that we always want to be working in on. Then you can get people bought into, without even labeling it product-led growth, that this is something that we need to change. Start there. Start with helping
Yeah.
your users experience the value. And so when you have that small team, you can move a bit quicker and get those wins, because once you do get some of those early wins and you start saying like, hey, we had these 4 customer onboarding calls. Now we only have 1. We've saved so much more money on customer onboarding. And you know what? Customers are more successful. They access the value of the product faster. We're seeing great wins. And then they start going to the sales team and plugging in data from the product. And they start seeing, wow, we just closed these 10 accounts, had no clue they had their entire team in this product. I wouldn't have known anything differently. And so this team can start building momentum very quickly, going from team to team, get them bought in, because here's the hard truth. Everyone wants to be on the winning team. Everyone. Nobody wants to be on that loser team and be like, hey, no one wants to be left with the bucket and be like, oh, I'm just doing the old thing.
Yeah.
If the new thing's working, people want to go in that direction. And so proving out those wins and having the right data to back it, that is massive as far as making that transition faster. Where I see people go wrong is just not having that data and be like, hey, we did some experiments and like tried stuff, but nothing to prove. That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things you just mentioned is being on a winning team and not staying on what is starting to work less and less. And I think one part of why product-led growth is inevitable rather than just a buzzword is there's strong market shifts that are taking us there. Like you said, people want to try before they buy it. They don't want to go to a sales rep. The power is shifted to the end user. We're all working remote. There's hyper competition for methods of acquisition, like paid ads, like outreach. Like it's starting to be a lot of noise. So people just want to experience some value through your brand, your marketing, and then get to your product. So I think that's super interesting, and it's reason why I think it makes sense to get buy-in from a small team and to start experimenting. There's market shifts that are going to push you there anyway. Seeing what we're in today. Another thing that you've mentioned is I think we can make the statement that product-led growth doesn't equal no sales reps.
Totally.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you see the structure and the workflow change? Because I think a lot of what people are asking about is, okay, I'm bought in. I'm bought into product-led growth. I think it makes sense. It's inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
How do I change my workflow right now to something else? And I think sales reps are still asking the question. You mentioned product data.
Yeah.
What do you see in the best SaaS companies that are product led in terms of reworking their sales workflows?
Yeah. So as far as that goes, some of the best companies that we look up to, we're like, oh, that's like a perfect example of a product-led company, whether it's like Miro, Slack, or trying to think of like Asana or something like that. So we look at those companies, and a lot of people will say, oh, like it's just completely product-led. They don't even have sales teams or anything like that. And it's like, no, actually they do spend quite a bit on their sales team. And why they do that is because there's a lot of value hidden in some of these accounts that if there wasn't sales in that process, then it would, they couldn't capture that value. And so the question I always ask people is like, do you need sales in every part of the business? My answer is actually no. There's a lot of great B2C examples of this where they're completely product led, like chess.com, love them, and addicting. But like you
Indeed.
can use this game, and it's free. They have the free trial and all that stuff. You can go into it and get a lot of value. It's fun, and it's like they're never going to have a sales team. Probably same thing with Netflix. They do have a sales team for different stuff, but not so much for the consumer side. And so you look at those businesses, you're like, okay, great. They built these beautiful, multi-million, multi-billion dollar businesses without a sales team. So will that apply to B2B? Now, B2B is a bit of a different bird, because it's like, well, sometimes it might make sense where, like, let's say your average contract value is like under $10 a month for like forever. But like, look at Slack, for instance. That's under $10 per month per user. But the thing is, some companies have a lot of users. And so as you go into those accounts, let's say someone signs up for Slack and, her name's Sally, she shares it with her coworkers, she gets her team on board, and then they start sharing it internally, and every team's now on Slack. They use that as their main place to send all their messages and everything else. So where in that process do you reach out to them to be like, hey, you've hit your limits, you're losing access to all your data every day because you're hitting your message limits, you're hitting all this other limits. Who do you reach out to? How do you go about that whole sales motion? So this problem is really apparent in so many product-led businesses right now that are serving B2B customers, where it's like, hey, there's so much lost potential here if we don't help them. And so the big question to ask is, if you're ever considering like, where do we insert sales into our current motion? What does that look like? You must ask yourself this question, which is sales adding value or friction in this whole process? Now, if it's like the only way someone can sign up for your product is if they talk to sales, okay, that might be adding a bit of friction. And sure, there's reasons to do it in the early stages of any business that do make sense and are valid if you're trying to understand what are the core needs of the business or customer and everything else like that. But let's say you get to a certain scale. No, that's just adding friction. And so you want to understand, okay, where can they add value? So you might go through that Slack example and say, all right, we have the head of operations. They've signed up. You've identified that particular person as like, okay, in the past, we've had really good luck with the head of operations and reaching out to them. So how do you navigate that account? How do you set up the flow for that account? How do you know and identify that person very quickly and early on in the journey? And so when sales does reach out to them, they can have a really great conversation and be like, hey, just want to let you know you're losing access to a lot of this important data that I'm sure you probably don't have backed up anywhere else or something like that. And they're providing a ton of value. They're like, oh, I didn't even know that. Like, now is probably the time it's to upgrade, and we actually have a great team plan for you that you would benefit more from. And so sales in that case provides a ton of value. So hope that kind of busts the myth of like sales and PLG. Some of the best product companies are a hybrid mix, and they do utilize sales quite aggressively to hit their goals too. And it's done with that intention of utilizing that product data and to understand how are people using the product and how can we best serve them.
Yeah. And I think if for people listening, 40% of Slack's revenue last year came from sales reps expanding accounts, converting them faster, and really upselling them. And if you look at Zoom's business model, there's a lot of upsell too. And a lot of those S1s for product-led companies that go on the public market, you see that a lot of that revenue comes from sales reps. Yes, you want to automate some of your users and you want to convert them, but sales reps are still driving a lot of revenue for those companies. One thing that I would ask is, you mentioned where the sales rep bring value into the funnel. What are other criterias that, because we're mentioning big companies, we're mentioning Slack, we're mentioning Zoom, but we see smaller SaaS also integrate sales really efficiently. I think Lemlist is a great example of being merged of a sales-led and product-led approach. What are other criterias that you would look at to really identify where should sales be involved? I'm guessing annual contract value is one, right? You want to focus. You don't want to focus on accounts if you have a low ACV and higher ACV. Any other data points that you would look at to integrate sales?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the important metrics that you should be looking at is just like, what is a product qualified lead for your business? And so, if you're new to whatever that word is, it's basically just trying to look for and identify who are the accounts or users that are experiencing the value of the product. I know what you do at Blinks is really just product qualified accounts. So that's
What we
everyone.
do. Yeah, that's
Same
what we
thing. It's
track.
looking at the count. How's the count using it? And so product qualified lead is like, okay, one of those users, are they really experiencing the value within the product? And so when you have those metrics set up, it makes the outreach process so much easier, because you're going to start looking for those accounts or users and be like, hey, this person has just experienced the value of the product. now we should probably prompt them if they want to continue using this product and get value. My favorite example of this is Drift. And so in the early days, they just set up their product qualified lead, and it was like, hey, someone has 100 conversations with this Drift website on their website. And that for them was like that moment where people had enough time to use the product and get value from it, that when they reached out to them, there was actually like that 30 to 60% close rate, which is just unheard of. And so for the sales team, they loved it because it was like, hey, like these people are ready to close. They understand the value. We're not really convincing them much on like what this product can or can't do. They've actually known what it can do. They just want to continue using it. And as a sales rep, they can actually use their creativity and be like, well, you're only getting 100 conversations a month now, but we've actually seen some other customers that use this kind of prompt or this thing on their sales page or their pricing page, and they get 200, and they really make this something where they're like, wow, I could get so much more value from this. And they're providing that more consultative value add as far as that goes. And for salesperson, just going through and qualifying, that's the boring part of the job. So if you can automate that part, sales teams love it because you're making their jobs easier.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. I think that's super interesting. What do you think are the biggest mistakes? Because you see a lot of companies, you see how they implement their tools, their processes. What do you think are the biggest so you've explained really well, where should sales be involved? How can sales be involved? And what are those data points in terms of product qualification should they go after to engage? And what are the results? What do you think are the biggest mistakes when it comes to implementing sales in the product-led motion?
Yeah, I think it really is that data issue, which I'm happy to see there is more companies like coming up to solve that problem, because the current tool stack that a lot of companies are using is the traditional sales led ones. And like there's that CRM dashboard, you move deals from one side to the other. It's a lot more complicated in a product led company because it's not quite as linear. And
Yeah.
so you got to identify, okay, where are they really in this stage? Because it's not just the stage of the account, it's also often the stage of all the users within that account. What are they doing? How are they engaging with the product? And so the big mistake there is just not having the right tooling to really understand how are people using the product. And even basic stuff like, okay, create a particular funnel of like how people go through your product. Do you know like what percentage of people who sign up for your product actually go into your product? Do you know what percentage of people who go into your product actually see value? Okay, do you know what percentage of people who see value actually upgrade? And so just having some of those basic numbers and percentages will just make proving the case of becoming product led that much easier. So it's really simple stuff like that. The only other kind of like big mistake I've seen some companies do is just move a bit too quickly. I think it's really common in the SaaS space for this, and I like moving quick. I'm on this quick, like do stuff quick, kind of jam. But the problem with it sometimes, especially when it comes to like launching a free trial or something, is like you might just like be like, okay, let's launch it right away and let's go and see how it works. But then you don't quite have the onboarding experience right. And so
Yeah.
you expend all this resources and time promoting this free trial, and then you realize, wait a minute, we didn't actually do a good enough job helping people get the value within the product. So it's basically like signing up for a game. You download the game on your phone. The game doesn't really work well. You don't get it. You don't get value. What's the likelihood that you're ever going to come back to that game?
Zero, minus 10%.
Yeah. So like for product companies, there's this percentage, like 40 to 60% of users never come back after that first time user experience. So it's basically game over if you don't provide that value right away. And so that's the thing where it's like, okay, you can launch the part of it very quickly. For most people and tools, it's easy enough to do. But the part you got to be concerned about is, can this actually help someone see value in the product quickly? And so if you can solve that, you can do that while you're still sales led and really experiencing the value of the product. You can see that, accelerate that motion of time to value. But then you could launch it after. So I would just rearrange the steps.
That's super smart. No, that's super smart. I think people forget that the first step of product led growth is have a great product that gets people to value. I think if you don't have that, you can't do anything. It's not worth talking about sales, talking about marketing, talking about workflows. If you don't have a great product, it gets people to value. And your partner Ramley just wrote a book on product led onboarding, which is great.
Yes,
I have
because
it
it's so
near me
important.
right
It's like if you
now.
don't get that onboarding, it doesn't work.
Yeah, like obviously sales are super relevant at the end of the funnel, but at first, like make sure to have a great onboarding and get people to value. You can't do anything if you don't do that. And by the way, we'll have Ramley on the show next week, so we'll get some insight on
Awesome.
onboarding. But that's really interesting. Coming back to what you said, making it simple. I think a lot of people are complicating it, of wanting to have super complex to milestones that are really difficult to track. It doesn't necessarily need to be complicated. For example, we're working with user pilot right now to track their product qualified accounts, and they have two criteria. Did they install the snippet? Are they X amount of employees? That's it. You start with there and you iterate. But speaking about complicated, one thing that I found really valuable in the PLG certification class was the bit on pricing. I think that's a big question mark for everyone, because
Totally.
you were used to the sales led, seat based pricing, but I don't believe it's the right one for a lot of product led companies. So, do you mind just explaining a bit about how would you approach pricing your solution if you want to go product led?
Totally. And this was one of the areas when I was writing the book on product led growth, I got to the halfway point and I was like, oh man, I don't know enough about pricing, but this thing keeps popping up again and again and again and again. And I
Yep.
started looking at like all the companies I was helping that were product led. And I started seeing some patterns like, oh, that's why it worked. Because they had these like really easy, simple pricing models. And so it really just comes down to the fact of when you're building a product led business, there's this weird arranged marriage that needs to happen with your pricing model and your customer acquisition model. Because let's say you just decide, hey, let's really go gung ho on this customer acquisition model. Let's make everything free. And then you don't have a business. And it's like, great, you can get tons of users. Maybe if you're venture back, you can do that for a while. But eventually you got to lean into that pricing model and find out what are those levers that we can pull in order to monetize these accounts and users. So that's the tricky part in product led business, because if you go the other way, then it's like, okay, let's lean into the pricing model. Let's put upgrade call to actions on everything. And then people sign up for our free trial, free model, and it does nothing. Like
Yeah.
that's the worst case scenario. Like, oh man, you could just put buy now. That would have been better, because now I don't have the expectation that I can just, go in and see some value here. So that's kind of the two parallel things. But the one constant between all of it is a value metric. So, what is the way you price? And can you price in a way where, as someone uses the product more, they also get charged more? And so, for companies like ActiveCampaign, ConvertKit, Keep, most CRM or email marketing based solutions, it's contacts. So, like the number of contacts you have as your list grows, you get charged more. And sure, you can like slice and dice it a bit differently based on the capabilities, but at its core, the value metric is always contacts. And so, why that's beautiful for product led businesses is because everyone's going to come into your product and be like, hey, if we're enterprise, we're going to get, let's say, $100,000 worth of value from your product. They're not thinking that, but they're willing to pay somewhere around that, let's say a tenth of that, and give you $10,000. And then there's also that startup that's coming to your product or pricing page, and they're just thinking to themselves, wow, I want to be able to have a plan that's just $10 a month, and start there. And eventually it could grow into that big enterprise account as well. But once people hit that pricing page, they need to know very quickly, how much is this going to charge me in under 5 seconds? And so whether it's enterprise or some smaller company, you need to give them that. And that value metric is so important to that piece of the puzzle, that once you have it, it just makes it easy for people to identify, what am I going to be charged, and have the confidence in really signing up because they know exactly what they're going to be charged.
Yeah, and I think the result of that too is you satisfy much more of your smaller clients, and you can upsell or increase revenue with bigger ones if you charge per per your value metric or per usage. So I think that's super smart. And PLG companies, in my mind, are not yet, at least the small to medium ones, are not yet putting a lot of emphasis enough on their pricing, but definitely start thinking about it and thinking about your value metric. Obviously, it's you go deeper in the certification. So I encourage everyone to take the product led class. That really helped us into thinking about a lot of the functions of product led growth. So that's amazing. I think it's time to wrap up. You're a very busy person. I need to leave you alone for the day. But before I do, like any podcast, I need to go on the bandwagon and ask you a few quick fire questions. So I'm going to ask you 4. You ready?
Yep, do it.
Cool. What have I not asked you that you think I should ask?
Ooh, so I was just thinking about this one. What should Blink's value metric be?
Oh God, you're throwing me under the bus here. I think for us the value. So I'm gonna ask you the question before I answer it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But what do you think Blink's value metric should be?
I was
If we
thinking
track-
product qualified accounts would kind of fit nicely into your value as far as that goes, because it's like, hey, if someone has, 10,000 product qualified accounts, that makes sense. But the tricky thing there is the tracking of it. It might be better to do like the users versus the accounts, because you might not be able to identify all accounts, kind of thing.
That's a good point. We're hesitating between users and accounts, and we're working on pricing right now, and it's gonna be per volume. So if a company signs up and has, I don't know, below 500 accounts that sign up every month, it's going to be free, and then as you ramp up, it's going to be more expensive. So it really aligns with the value. So great question. I wasn't expecting that, but great one. Second one, which CEO or founding team do you look up to and why?
CEO or founding team? Man, I guess I don't study enough companies.
Nice.
Is this a cop out? No, yeah. I suck at that question, so
that's fair enough. Let's skip it then. What's the most underrated tool, growth technique, or skill for sales in your opinion, or product-led sales?
Oh, for product-led sales? Yeah. Just identify product qualified leads. It's like you mentioned with that user pilot example, it doesn't have to be complicated. Don't overthink it. It's for user pilot, it might just be as simple as uploading the script and they launch their first product tour or something like that. So
amazing. I
think most companies overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. What does someone need to do to see value? Track it.
I like the indirect shout out, because that's what we do. So thanks for the quick shout out. Last question. Something you wish you knew when you were 20.
Failure is what you make of it.
Amazing. Well, amazing, Wes. Thank you. I really enjoyed the chat. I'm sure our listeners will do too. If people want to learn more about ProductLed, where could they go?
Yeah, just check out ProductLed.com.
Amazing. What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn.
Cool, man. Thanks for being here and agreeing to do this. Have a good one.
No worries. You too.
All right. Bye. See ya.